On the brisk, grey morning of November 14th, 2023, a call was placed to the city's emergency services. The voice on the other end was tight with anxiety, belonging to a young woman named Jasmine Reed. She was calling to request a wellness check on her best friend, Keisha Johnson. Jasmine explained that Keisha had not answered her calls or texts for 2 days, which was completely out of character. She was supposed to be preparing for a major trip, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to visit Europe. The silence was deafening. When 2 uniformed officers arrived at the modern, slightly sterile apartment building in the city's up-and-coming arts district, they found nothing immediately amiss. The building was secure, the hallway quiet. They knocked on the door of apartment 4B. There was no answer. After getting permission from the building manager to enter, they opened the door into a space that was both orderly and deeply unsettling. The apartment was pristine, almost unnaturally so. On a sleek granite countertop in the kitchen sat a brand new smartphone, its screen dark. Beside it lay a passport and a plane ticket to Paris. In the bedroom, an open suitcase lay on the bed, half filled with expensive new clothes, their tags still attached. A sketchbook, its pages filled with breathtakingly vivid charcoal drawings, was left open on a small desk. But of the apartment's resident, 18-year-old Keisha Johnson, there was no sign at all. What the officers didn't know was that they were standing in the final scene of a meticulously crafted tragedy. It was a story that had begun not with a bang, but with a whisper of hope. Just 4 months earlier, in July 2023, Keisha Johnson had arrived in the sprawling, indifferent city with 2 worn suitcases and a heart full of fierce ambition. She was a girl forged in the warmth of a tight-knit community, but her dreams were too large for her hometown's borders. She had secured a partial scholarship to one of the country's most prestigious art schools, a feat that had been the singular focus of her entire young life. Keisha was a portrait artist of prodigious talent. She didn't just capture a likeness, she captured an essence, a flicker of a soul in the eyes of her subjects. Her hands, often smudged with charcoal, could translate the complex geography of a human face into something profound on paper. This scholarship was her validation, the first tangible proof that her gift was real and worth pursuing. But the scholarship was only partial. The city was an unforgivingly expensive place, and the gap between her funding and the actual cost of living was a chasm she had to bridge herself. She lived in a tiny, cramped dorm-style apartment far from the polished downtown core, in a neighborhood that buzzed with a nervous energy she never quite got used to. Her days were a grueling marathon. She attended demanding studio classes from morning until afternoon, then rushed to a part-time job at a campus coffee shop where the smell of burnt espresso clung to her clothes. Evenings were spent hunched over her desk under the dim glow of a cheap lamp, working on assignments or freelance commissions that paid just enough to cover her groceries. She was often tired, her body aching from long hours on her feet, but she was not unhappy. This was the price of the dream, and she was more than willing to pay it. She felt a powerful sense of purpose. Every dollar saved, every assignment completed was a step closer to the life she envisioned. A life as a working artist, her name known, her work respected. Her vulnerability was not one of weakness, but of circumstance. She was fiercely independent and capable, but she was also financially strained and emotionally isolated. Her family was hundreds of miles away, a loving but distant voice on the phone. Her primary connection in the city was Jasmine, another art student she'd met during orientation. They had bonded instantly over their shared passion and mutual anxieties about making it in a competitive world. Jasmine was more pragmatic, a graphic designer who saw art as a path to a stable career. Keisha was the purist, the romantic who believed in the transcendent power of her craft. This difference often led to light-hearted debates, but it was underpinned by a deep and genuine affection. In early September, the financial pressure began to mount. A notice about a mid-semester tuition installment sent a jolt of panic through her. She took on more hours at the coffee shop, sacrificing precious studio time. The fatigue began to settle deeper into her bones, a constant, weary companion. It was in this state of hopeful exhaustion that she walked into the encounter that would change everything. On a crisp Saturday afternoon in late September, Keisha decided to treat herself. She had just been paid for a small portrait commission, and instead of putting it all toward her tuition bill, she allowed herself a small luxury. She went to the Gilded Bean, a high-end cafe in the gallery district she had only ever admired from the outside. The air inside smelled of expensive coffee and quiet ambition. She found a small table in the corner, ordered a latte she couldn't really afford, and opened her sketchbook. For a few hours she wanted to feel like she belonged in this world of polished wood and hushed conversations, the world she was working so hard to enter. She began to sketch the face of an elderly woman sitting across the room, capturing the intricate web of lines around her eyes. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the man who'd taken the table next to hers until he spoke. He was in his mid-40s, dressed in a tailored grey suit that looked effortlessly expensive. His hair was silvering at the temples and his face was kind, etched with what appeared to be thoughtful intelligence. He leaned over slightly, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. He said he was sorry to interrupt, but he couldn't help but notice her work. He gestured toward her sketchbook. His praise was not the generic flattery she was used to. It was specific, knowledgeable. He commented on her use of negative space, the confidence of her lines. Keisha, usually shy with strangers, felt a flush of pride. She thanked him, her voice a little breathless. He introduced himself as Marcus Thorne. He explained that he was an independent art curator and collector, someone who spent his life searching for new and exciting talent. The word sent a thrill through her. It felt like a scene from a movie, a moment of pure serendipity. Marcus Thorne had a story for every occasion, a perfectly tailored narrative designed to create an immediate sense of connection. He told Keisha that he had started out as a painter himself, struggling in a tiny cold water flat, eating instant noodles for weeks on end. He said he understood the sacrifice, the burning need to create that overshadowed everything else. He claimed he hadn't had the singular focus to make it as a great artist, so he had channeled his passion into helping those who did. His story was a fabrication, a carefully constructed fiction, polished to a high sheen through repeated use. But to Keisha, a young woman desperate for a sign that she was on the right path, it was a profound and deeply resonant confession. It made him seem not just successful, but empathetic. He wasn't just a rich collector, he was one of her people. They talked for over an hour. He asked her about her influences, her aspirations, her struggles. He listened with an unnerving intensity, his eyes fixed on her, making her feel as though she were the most interesting person in the world. He validated every hope and every fear she tentatively expressed. He told her that her talent was undeniable, but that talent alone was rarely enough. He said what she needed was a guide, a mentor. Before he left, he asked if he could see more of her work. Keisha's heart pounded in her chest. She gave him her student portfolio website address and her phone number. He entered it into his phone with a warm smile, promising to be in touch. As she watched him walk out of the cafe, Keisha felt a dizzying sense of optimism. It was as if a door to a whole new world had just swung open before her. The encounter was, of course, no accident. Marcus Thorne had been observing her for 20 minutes before he approached. He had seen the worn-out backpack, the focused intensity, the way she nursed her single latte for over an hour. He had identified her as a perfect candidate, immense talent combined with profound financial need. His approach was a calculated first move in a game he had played many times before. The grooming process began that very evening. A text message arrived on Keisha's phone. It was from Marcus. He said he had spent the last hour looking through her online portfolio and was even more impressed than he had been in person. He wrote that her work had a maturity that was rare in an artist so young. The flattery was intoxicating. Over the next few days, Marcus established a pattern of consistent, supportive communication. He sent her links to articles about artists he thought would inspire her. He emailed her about gallery openings, encouraging her to go and absorb the atmosphere. He positioned himself not as a suitor, but as a dedicated and benevolent mentor. His critiques of her work were insightful and genuinely helpful. He would point out subtle weaknesses in her composition or suggest new techniques for achieving a certain texture. Keisha found her own skills improving under his digital tutelage. She began to look forward to his messages, to the validation and encouragement they provided. He never once made an inappropriate or romantic suggestion. His entire focus was on her art, her talent, her future. He was building a foundation of trust, brick by methodical brick. He was becoming an indispensable part of her life, a constant, reassuring presence in a city where she often felt adrift and alone. A week after they met, he called her. He said he had been thinking about her situation. He told her that using cheap materials was holding her back, that her talent deserved professional-grade tools. Before she could protest, he explained that one of his clients, a wealthy patron, had established a small fund to support emerging artists. He had, he said, nominated her for a materials grant. 2 days later, a large box arrived at her cramped apartment. Inside was a treasure trove of art supplies she could only have dreamed of owning. There were sets of imported charcoal sticks, expensive archival paper, and professional-grade fixatives. The total value was well over $1,000. Tucked inside was a simple, typewritten note. It read, "An investment in your future, M." Keisha was overwhelmed with gratitude. She called him, her voice thick with emotion, trying to find the words to thank him. He was gracious and dismissive of her thanks. He simply said that seeing her talent flourish was all the reward he needed. This act of generosity cemented her trust in him completely. How could she doubt the intentions of a man who was so selflessly investing in her career? This was the first extravagant gift, the first golden link in the chain that was beginning to wrap around her. It dramatically improved the quality of her work, but it also created a powerful, unspoken sense of debt. She felt a new pressure, not just to succeed for herself, but to prove that his faith in her was not misplaced. Jasmine was skeptical. When Keisha showed her the new supplies, her friend's reaction was not one of pure joy. Jasmine asked who this man was, how Keisha had met him. She listened to the story with a furrowed brow. She said it sounded too good to be true. Keisha bristled at her friend's caution. She felt that Jasmine was being cynical, that she didn't understand the kind of serendipitous connections that could happen in the art world. She defended Marcus passionately, describing his kindness, his knowledge, his belief in her. She explained that he was a mentor, nothing more. The conversation ended with a slight tension between them, the first fissure in their close friendship. A few weeks later, Marcus escalated his campaign of manufactured generosity. During a phone call, he commented on how her phone kept cutting out. He framed it as a professional concern. He said that as her career began to take off, she would need reliable professional communication. He told her that he couldn't have her missing an important call from a gallery because of a faulty device. The next day, a courier delivered a small sleek box to her door. Inside was the latest model of a top-tier smartphone. It was another gift worth over $1,000. Keisha felt a pang of unease this time, a feeling she quickly suppressed. The sheer scale of his generosity was becoming difficult to process. But again, his justification was flawless. It was a tool for her career, an investment. He even helped her set it up over the phone, walking her through the transfer of her data. He told her she should download a few apps he recommended for artists: portfolio managers, editing software, and a calendar app to keep track of exhibitions. The apps seemed innocuous, helpful even. She installed them without a second thought. The most significant escalation was yet to come. In mid-October, Marcus raised the topic of her living situation. He said he was worried about her living so far from the city centre, in a neighbourhood he described as uninspiring and unsafe. He told her that to be a successful artist she needed to be immersed in the art scene, not commuting for an hour each way. He then made an astonishing offer. He told her that his patronage fund had another program, a grant that provided subsidized studio living spaces for promising artists. He had found a perfect place for her, a small but beautiful studio apartment in the heart of the gallery district. The grant, he explained, would cover her security deposit and the first 4 months of rent, giving her time to find her feet. This offer left Keisha speechless. It was the solution to all of her most pressing problems. It meant safety. It meant more time for her art. It meant an end to her exhausting commute and the constant, grinding financial anxiety. It felt like a miracle. She talked to Jasmine about it. Her excitement palpable. Jasmine's reaction was even more alarmed than before. She asked Keisha directly if she understood what was happening. She said that a man she barely knew was essentially buying her a new life. She asked what he would want in return. The question stung Keisha deeply. She accused Jasmine of being jealous, of not being able to believe that something good could happen to her. She said with conviction that Marcus wanted nothing in return except to see her succeed. The argument was more serious this time. They parted on bad terms, and a painful distance grew between them. At the end of October, Keisha moved into her new apartment. It was everything Marcus had promised. The single large room had high ceilings, a wall of windows that flooded the space with natural light and polished hardwood floors. It was sparsely furnished with elegant modern pieces that Marcus had arranged to be loaned from a furniture design company. It was beautiful, clean, and quiet. It was also profoundly isolating. She was now a 30-minute train ride away from the university campus and from Jasmine, her only real friend. Her new neighbours were quiet professionals who kept to themselves. The building, with its security cameras and key fob entry, felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. Marcus encouraged this isolation, framing it as a necessary step for her artistic growth. He would tell her that she needed to disconnect from the distractions of her old life. He subtly criticised Jasmine, saying that her friend's pragmatic worldview was the enemy of true art. He told Keisha that people who haven't experienced the art world at a high level simply couldn't understand the path she was on. Keisha, wanting to believe in her new, elevated life, started to believe him. She returned Jasmine's worried texts with brief, reassuring messages, but she stopped calling. She was made to feel that her old connections belonged to a past she was rapidly outgrowing. Her world was shrinking, its borders defined entirely by Marcus Thorne. With her trust secured and her isolation complete, the dynamic began to shift. The mask of the benevolent mentor began to slip, revealing the cold, calculating control that lay beneath. The first overt change came in early November, about a week after she moved into the new studio. Marcus called her, his tone different. It was less encouraging, more commanding. He announced that he had secured a major breakthrough for her. He had arranged a trip to Europe. They would spend 2 weeks visiting Paris, Berlin, and Rome. He claimed he had set up meetings for her with influential gallery owners and collectors, people who could launch her career overnight. Keisha was stunned. The idea was thrilling, but also terrifying. She stammered something about her classes, her midterm exams. For the first time, Marcus's voice became sharp. He asked her if she was serious. He reminded her of the apartment, the art supplies, the phone. He said, his voice laced with disappointment, "Keisha, I have invested a great deal in you. This is not a casual invitation. This is the entire point of my mentorship. Are you telling me you're going to throw it all away for a few college exams?" The words hit her like a physical blow. Guilt washed over her, hot and immediate. He was right. He had given her everything. How could she be so ungrateful? She quickly backtracked, apologizing profusely and assuring him that she would, of course, go. She would figure something out with her professors. The relationship was now explicitly transactional. Her attendance was not a request, but a requirement, a down payment on the debt she had unknowingly accrued. Her hesitation had been a test, and her quick capitulation confirmed to him that his control was absolute. In the days that followed, the control intensified. Marcus insisted on preparing her for the trip. This preparation was, in reality, a systematic tightening of his grip on every aspect of her life. He told her that her current wardrobe of student jeans and sweaters was unacceptable for meeting his contacts in Europe. He took her on a shopping trip, not to stores she would choose, but to exclusive, high-end boutiques. He didn't ask her what she liked, he told her what to wear. He selected elegant, sophisticated dresses, silk blouses, and tailored coats. He paid for everything with a credit card, waving away the astronomical cost as a necessary business expense. Keisha felt like a doll being dressed, her own taste and identity erased. Then came the rules. He insisted on installing what he called a travel security and itinerary app on her new phone. He sold it as a tool for her safety, a way for his office to track her flight status and meeting schedules while they were abroad. He sat with her and guided her through the installation, his hand briefly covering hers as he tapped the screen. The app, of course, was a sophisticated piece of spyware, giving him real-time access to her location, her messages, her calls, and even her phone's microphone. His calls and texts became more frequent, more demanding. He wanted to know where she was and what she was doing at all times. If she missed a call, she would receive a rapid series of follow-up texts, each one more insistent than the last. He framed it all as concern, as the careful management required for a rising star. But it felt like surveillance. The money he had once given so freely now became a tool for control. He had arranged for a weekly stipend to be deposited into her account for living expenses. If she pleased him, if she was compliant and available, the amount might increase. If she showed any sign of independence or questioned his directives, he would subtly mention the patronage fund's budget, and the stipend for that week would be delayed or reduced. Her life was now completely managed by him. A deep, gnawing unease began to take root in Keisha's mind. The initial excitement of her new life had curdled into a subtle but persistent anxiety. She was living in a beautiful apartment she couldn't afford, wearing clothes she hadn't chosen, and preparing for a trip that now felt more like a summons than an opportunity. She was lonelier than she had ever been in her cramped, noisy dorm room. The silence of her pristine studio apartment had become oppressive. It was Monday, November 11th, just 3 days before their scheduled departure for Paris. The feeling of being trapped was becoming unbearable. Keisha tried to rationalize it, telling herself this was just pre-trip jitters, that this was the pressure that came with success. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. That afternoon, Marcus came to her studio apartment. He was there to drop off her physical plane ticket and a folder containing their itinerary. He was in a hurry, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a sense of agitated energy. He placed his sleek silver laptop on her kitchen counter while he talked. His phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen with an expression of annoyance. He told Keisha it was an urgent call from a client in Tokyo he had to take. He stepped out onto the small balcony to get better reception, sliding the glass door almost completely shut behind him. He called back into the room, his voice sharp. He told her that he'd be back in a moment and that she should not, under any circumstances, touch his laptop. The command, so specific and so stern, hung in the air. Keisha stood frozen in the middle of the room, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Why would he say that? What was on the laptop that was so important? The screen was dark, but the power light was on. It was asleep, not off. A war raged within her. Every instinct for self-preservation, every ounce of gratitude and obligation she felt towards him, told her to obey, to walk away. But a deeper, more primal curiosity, born of weeks of suppressed fear and confusion, urged her forward. This was a chance, a small, unexpected window into the world of a man who had completely taken over her own. Her hands were trembling as she walked to the counter. She looked at the sliding glass door. Marcus was standing with his back to her, deep in an animated conversation. She reached out and lightly touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. It was unlocked. The desktop was clean, organized with a chilling precision. There were folders for investments, galleries, and contacts. And then she saw it. A folder in the corner of the screen with an innocuous name, Projects. For some reason, her blood ran cold. She moved the cursor over it and clicked. The Projects folder opened to reveal not business plans or art proposals, but a list of subfolders. Each folder was titled with a woman's first name and a year. Anja 2019, Sophia 2020, Chloe 2021, Isabel 2022. Her breath hitched in her throat. She scrolled down the list. There were dozens of them, and at the very bottom of the list, she saw the final folder. Keisha 2023. A wave of nausea and terror so profound, it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. Her hands shaking uncontrollably, she clicked on the folder labelled Chloe 2021. It opened to reveal a horrifyingly detailed dossier. There were photos of a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes, a dancer from the look of them. The photos were a mix of professional headshots and candid pictures, some of which were clearly taken without the woman's knowledge. There was a document labelled Psychological Profile. Keisha opened it. It was a cold, analytical breakdown of the woman's vulnerabilities. Postgraduate debt, estranged from family, desperate for validation from established figures. It was like reading a clinical diagnosis of her own soul. There were financial records, social media screenshots, and a log of their communications. Then she saw another subfolder, Disposition. Her finger trembled as she clicked. Inside was a single file, a link to a news article from a small European newspaper. The headline read, Young Canadian Dancer Dies in Tragic Hotel Fall. The article described the death of Chloe Dubois as a suspected suicide. Frantically, she clicked back and opened the folder for Sophia 2020. It was the same terrifying pattern. A beautiful young musician from Brazil. A psychological profile detailing her loneliness after a recent breakup. A folder full of invasive photos. And the disposition file, which linked to a brief news report about an accidental overdose in a Berlin apartment. The scope of the horror unfolded before her. She was not a protégée. She was not a special talent he had discovered. She was a project. She was a name on a list, the latest in a long line of vulnerable young women who had been systematically targeted, groomed, and isolated. The gifts, the apartment, the mentorship. It was all a script, a repeatable, perfected process of entrapment. The man on the balcony was not Marcus Thorne, benevolent art curator. He was a predator of the most patient and monstrous kind. The trip to Europe was not her big break, it was the final act. It was where the story would end, in a hotel room in Paris or Berlin, with her death staged as yet another tragic accident or suicide. The realization was a physical force, sucking the air from her lungs, the strength from her limbs. She was standing in her own coffin, a beautiful, sunlit tomb he had built just for her. Panic, pure and absolute, seized her. Her first instinct was to bolt, to run out the door and scream for help. But the rational part of her brain, fighting through the tidal wave of terror, knew it was not that simple. She was in his apartment, paid for with his money. Her phone, her only link to the outside world, was a tracking device in his pocket. Her face was on a plane ticket sitting on the counter, Where could she run that he wouldn't find her? She looked around the beautiful studio, and for the first time, she saw it for what it was. The expensive clothes in the suitcase, the sleek phone on the counter, the elegant furniture, they were not gifts, they were props. They were the tools of her own destruction, evidence of a life he had fabricated for her, a life he could just as easily erase. A desperate, fragile plan began to form in her mind. She had to play along. She had to pretend that she had seen nothing. She would go on the trip, and at the first opportunity, at the airport, at a crowded museum, on a busy street, she would make a run for it. She would scream, she would fight, she would do whatever it took to get away. It was a terrifying gamble, but it felt like the only one she had. With trembling fingers, she closed the folders, her mind racing to remember exactly how the screen had looked. She returned the laptop to its sleep state. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the mask of normalcy back onto her own face. She had to appear calm. She had to appear excited about the trip. Her life depended on the performance. Just then, the sliding glass door slid open. Marcus stepped back into the room, putting his phone back in his pocket. He was smiling, but his eyes, those kind, intelligent eyes she had once admired, were now cold and analytical. They swept the room, taking in every detail, and then they landed on her. He must have seen it. The flicker of terror in her eyes she couldn't hide. The unnatural stiffness of her posture. The faint tremor in her hands. His smile did not falter, but it changed, twisting into something predatory and chillingly self-satisfied. He knew. He walked slowly toward the counter, his movements casual, deliberate. He picked up his laptop. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He just looked at her, his head tilted slightly. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a terrifying finality. He said, "You looked, didn't you, Keisha?" The question was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The mask of Marcus Thorne, the charming curator, did not just slip. It shattered, disintegrating into dust, revealing the monster that had been hiding in plain sight all along. His face became a blank canvas, devoid of all emotion, except a cold, terrifying clarity. Keisha couldn't speak. A strangled sob was trapped in her throat. She could only shake her head, a pathetic, useless denial. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a shame," he said. "I truly thought you were the one. So much talent. Such a perfect subject." He wasn't angry. He sounded disappointed, like a scientist whose promising experiment had just been contaminated. He continued to speak, his voice calm and methodical, as if he were explaining a complex piece of art. He told her that her curiosity had created a complication, an unfortunate deviation from the plan. He explained that the project required absolute trust and absolute discretion. By looking at his work, she had broken that trust. She had left him with no other choice. "The narrative is everything, Keisha," he said, his eyes empty and hard as stone. The story of the brilliant but troubled young artist, overwhelmed by the pressure, who tragically takes her own life on the eve of her greatest triumph. It's poetic, it's believable, but a frightened girl who knows too much, that's just messy. He moved toward her, and Keisha finally found her voice. It came out as a desperate, pleading cry. She backed away, stumbling. Over an ottoman, her hands held up in a futile gesture of defense. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone. She begged him. She would do anything he wanted. He simply shook his head, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. He said, "I know you won't tell anyone." The threat was no longer veiled. It was absolute. The situation had escalated from psychological manipulation to the stark reality of physical violence. He was going to kill her, right here, in this beautiful room he had built for her. He closed the distance between them. Keisha turned and ran for the door, but he was faster. He caught her by the arm, his grip like iron. The charm and sophistication were gone, replaced by brutal, efficient strength. She fought, she scratched, she screamed, but her cries were swallowed by the soundproofed walls of her luxurious prison. He overpowered her easily, forcing her back toward the small, tidy kitchen. He was not raging, he was working, his movements precise and practiced. From his jacket pocket, he produced a small vial and a syringe. Keisha's mind flashed back to the news article about Sophia, the musician who had died of an accidental overdose. This was his method. Clean, quiet, and easily misinterpreted. Her struggle became frantic, a primal fight for survival. But it was hopeless. He was stronger, more prepared. He was a predator, and she was his cornered prey. He held her fast, and with a chillingly steady hand, he administered the injection. He whispered in her ear, his voice once again calm. He told her it would be painless. He told her to think of it as a final kindness. Keisha's strength began to fade almost instantly. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision blurred at the edges. The last thing she saw was his impassive face looking down at her, his expression one of detached professionalism. Then the world dissolved into darkness. He had done what he came to do. He had silenced his mistake. Keisha Johnson was never seen again. We now return to that grey November morning, to the two police officers standing in the silent apartment. To them, it was a missing person case, albeit a strange one. They filed their report and a detective was assigned. His name was David Miller. Detective Miller was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man with a quiet demeanour and a keen eye for details that others missed. He had a reputation for being methodical and relentless, especially on cases involving the vulnerable. When he reviewed the initial report on Keisha Johnson, several things immediately struck him as wrong. He stood in Keisha's apartment himself the next day. He saw the half-packed suitcase, the expensive new clothes. He saw the plane ticket to Paris. He also saw the stack of professional-grade art paper next to her easel, a stark contrast to the cheaper pads of newsprint tucked away in a closet. This wasn't the apartment of a struggling art student. It was the apartment of a woman being sponsored. His first call was to the university. They confirmed Keisha was a scholarship student with significant financial need. They also reported that she had been a dedicated student until recently, when her attendance had become sporadic. They had no information about a trip to Europe. His next conversation was with the person who had called in the wellness check, Jasmine Reed. Miller met her at a coffee shop near campus. The young woman was distraught, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She told him everything she knew. She told him about Keisha's talent, her financial struggles, and her fierce determination. Then, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and anger, she told him about Marcus Thorne. She described the chance meeting, the escalating gifts, the new apartment that had isolated Keisha from her. She said she had warned Keisha, begged her to be careful. Jasmine told Miller, he bought her a new life, and she was so desperate for it that she couldn't see the price tag. Jasmine gave the detective every piece of information she had. Marcus's full name, the vague description of him being an art curator, and the fact that he was supposed to be taking Keisha to Paris. This was the first concrete lead. Miller ran the name Marcus Thorne through every available database. The initial results were frustratingly thin. There was no registered art curator or gallery owner by that name. There were no business licenses, no tax records. It was as if the man didn't exist in any official capacity. But Miller was persistent. He expanded his search, looking for aliases, for any criminal records connected to similar names. Finally, he got a hit. The name Marcus Thorne was an alias. The man's real name was Julian Croft, and Julian Croft had a sealed juvenile record for sexual assault. As an adult, he had been investigated, but never charged, in connection with the disappearance of two other young women in different states over the past decade. In both cases, the women had been aspiring performers who had suddenly come into money before they vanished. The pattern was undeniable. The key to the entire case, however, was sitting in a city impound lot. Julian Croft, in his haste to flee, had made a critical error. He had abandoned the car he had rented under his false name at the airport parking garage. Detectives located the vehicle, and inside, tucked under the passenger seat, they found his silver laptop. The discovery of the laptop broke the case wide open. Forensic analysts bypassed the password protection and found the projects folder. They found the files on Anja, Sophia, Chloe, and dozens of other young women from around the world. They found the meticulous records of his grooming process, the psychological profiles, the surveillance photos, and they found the file for Keisha Johnson. Inside Keisha's file, they found everything. Her financial aid statements, which he had likely hacked from the university server, screenshots of her social media, a detailed analysis of her vulnerability, high artistic ambition, coupled with severe financial distress, socially isolated in a new city, strong desire for mentorship and validation. It was a predator's business plan. The most chilling discovery in her file was a document titled Final Itinerary. It detailed not a series of meetings with gallery owners, but a plan to stage her suicide in a Paris hotel room 2 days after their arrival. The file even contained a draft of a suicide note, written in a style that mimicked Keisha's own expressive, slightly romantic way of writing. The laptop also provided a wealth of information about Croft's network. He wasn't working entirely alone. He had connections to international human trafficking rings. Some of his victims, the investigators theorized, were not murdered, but sold. He was a high-level procurer, using a sophisticated psychological method he had perfected over years, a method one forensic psychologist on the case dubbed patronage predation. The psychologist explained it to Miller and his team. She said that Croft's genius was in his understanding of hope. He didn't target the desperate, but the hopeful. He found young women on the cusp of realizing a dream and exploited their ambition. He presented himself as the key to that dream, making his control seem like an opportunity. The gifts were not bribes, they were investments that created a crushing weight of emotional and psychological obligation. He made his victims complicit in their own entrapment. An international warrant was issued for the arrest of Julian Croft. Armed with the information from his laptop, global law enforcement agencies began to move. 2 weeks after Keisha's disappearance, Croft was apprehended by an Interpol team at an airport in Vienna, Austria. He was not trying to flee. He was in a cafe in the middle of a conversation with a young, aspiring violinist. He was starting the process all over again. Julian Croft was extradited to the United States to face charges. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The laptop contained a detailed ledger of his crimes against dozens of women. He was charged with the murder of Keisha Johnson, and authorities in several other countries began opening new investigations into the disappearances and deaths of the other women in his files. Faced with a mountain of digital evidence, Croft was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But justice for Keisha Johnson could never be complete. Her body was never found. Croft refused to reveal what he had done with her, taking that final cruel secret with him to his prison cell. All that was left of her was the art she had created. In the aftermath, her story became a tragic but powerful cautionary tale. Her art, once seen only by her professors and a few friends, was exhibited. People finally saw the incredible talent that Julian Croft had sought to exploit. The charcoal portraits, so full of life and empathy, now served as a haunting testament to the vibrant life that had been so cruelly extinguished. The case of Keisha Johnson had a broader impact. It brought to light the insidious method of patronage predation, leading to new training protocols for law enforcement and awareness campaigns on college campuses and in arts communities. It served as a horrifying reminder that the most dangerous predators are often not the ones who use overt force, but the ones who come bearing gifts, offering to make our most cherished dreams come true. Keisha's story is a stark illustration of a dark truth in our modern world. Vulnerability is not always about weakness. Sometimes it is born of hope, ambition, and the burning desire for a better life. And there are those who have learned to see that hope not as something to be nurtured, but as something to be hunted. It reminds us that the most dangerous traps are not the ones we fall into, but the ones we are convinced to walk into ourselves, believing they are the doorway to everything we have ever wanted.